Welcome, everybody, to the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. My name is Nicole Greer, and they call me the Vibrant Coach. I have an incredible guest with me today. He is the author of Covert Cows and Chick-fil-A, How Faith, Cows, and Chicken Built an Iconic Brand. This is going to be an epic podcast. Let me tell you a little bit about the author, Steve Robinson. Steve is a consultant, an author, and a speaker on organizational culture design and leadership, brand strategy development, marketing planning, and distinctive advertising principles. I bet you know all about the cows. So Robinson is don't you love it? Robinson is a former executive vice president and the chief marketing officer of Chick-fil-A Incorporated. And he did this from 1981 to 2015. Prior to joining the company, Steve was the director of marketing for Six Flags Over Georgia theme park in Atlanta. And this role was preceded by marketing positions at two other Six Flags properties and communications manager at Texas Instruments. After beginning his career at Chick-fil-A as director of marketing, Steve went on to serve as vice president of the department before becoming the chief marketing officer. In his most recent role, he was responsible for overseeing marketing, advertising, brand development, menu development, and hospitality strategies. He is so worn out.
Worn me out.
During Steve's tenure, Chick-fil-A grew from 184 stores from 100 million to 2,100 stores. And don't miss this number, 6.8 billion. And it became one of the most iconic brands of our time. Woo! And I'm worn out from reading all that good stuff. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a treat to be with you. It sure is. Yeah,
Yeah.
And by the way, they're not missing me at all. This past year they hit 20 billion in sales, so they're still rocking and rolling.
I know that's right. I was just there yesterday, so I'm contributing to the whole thing. I'm part of the process.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to have you on the show. And, the first question I ask everybody that comes on the show is, what's your definition of leadership? So I just want to throw out that question and see what you think.
That's an easy question.
Okay.
Well, I think the simple answer for me is turn around and see if anybody's following.
Absolutely.
I think great leaders earn fellowship. I think for me personally, I think the greatest pleasure I took in my leadership was finding other great talent, empowering them, and hoping that they'll grow to be leaders as well. So great leaders, my second point is that great leaders produce other great leaders. And I was very privileged to work with some awesome people, and many of them are now playing significant roles at Chick-fil-A. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So I was reading your book, obviously. And again, everybody, the name of the book is Covert Cows and Chick-fil-A, How Faith, Cows, and Chicken Built an Iconic Brand. And Stan Richards, who is the gentleman and the marketeer who helped you put together the cow program, right? He said you were a leader who was respectful and inclusive. And I love those two words. So how does a leader show great respect for their people?
Well, I think first by, this is going to sound simplistic, and I learned it the hard way, first by keeping their mouth shut and listening to people, hear them out, let them express their thoughts, their ideas. Don't prejudge what they're going to say. Don't cut them off short. And I have all the background experiences where I did that. I learned the hard way, but I really do think the best way to show respect is to be a great listener. And the second one then is to ask a lot of questions and let people demonstrate how they can contribute. I think the other aspect of respect is that I'm a firm believer that every one of us walking on the face of the earth was created by God and for his pleasure. And how do we unleash the personality and the embedded uniqueness in every person? And so part of, I think, being a respectful leader is also trying to grow to know your people. What makes them tick? How do they think? What are their strengths? Even what are some of their weaknesses? And playing to their strengths, and then encourage them to work on the things that would actually make them a greater contributor or a greater leader. So I think those are the top two things I would say: be a great leader, and then empower people based upon what you see in them, and give them a chance to really thrive. And what happened for me, Nicole, is over time, I was very fortunate to attract a lot of people who, as it turned out, were much better at doing what I was charging them to do than if I had tried to continue to do it. They were a lot better at it. And in the process, creativity and innovation goes up, teamwork goes up. And the great thing for me was I got freed up to do the kind of things that not only I wanted to do, I got freed up to do the things that only I could do in my role, which changed over time. And so there you go. That's how I'd answer how you show respect.
I love that. I love that. And I also love in the book that you said there's three things that a leader needs to be building. One is the business. And so what I think you're talking about there is the finances, right? And our assets. Also, you need to be building the culture and building the team. So really a leader is leading three different initiatives.
Yes. And I would probably change that order a little bit. I'd start with culture. When I joined Chick-fil-A from Six Flags, I don't know that I realized how important culture was in an organization. Six Flags was a great company, had a great brand, but it was a very transactional oriented, short-term vision organization. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the theme park business.
Right.
But when I got to Chick-fil-A, I started to understand there's another way to think about the business. And that's first, why does the business exist? What is our purpose? Implicitly, then, who are we trying to serve? In other words, who are the critical constituents of the business, and in what order? Is it ownership first, or is it customers first? Is it staff and operators first, or is it customers first? So understanding why we exist, and there's a whole chapter in my book about how we kind of nailed down why Chick-fil-A existed. Corporate purpose got written in 1982 in a really very difficult time. So nailing down why it exists, what the other key component of culture for me is, what are the things that are non-negotiable? Some people use the word values, and I know a lot of people, they'll work up values, put words around them, throw them up on a chart. But I think values are only important in an organization if people see decision makers using them when they make decisions.
100%.
Yeah, and the most powerful values are the ones that simply are not negotiable. And there were 5 or 6 within Chick-fil-A. We eventually got those on paper. And so the first thing I would say that's critical is culture. Know why you exist, know what is non-negotiable, and know who you're serving, in what order. In terms of the health of the business, for me, it's not just finances. And again, this would be a little counter to what some people would say. To me, it's the health of the brand. I'm a firm believer that if the brand is healthy, if the brand is growing, and what I mean by that is it growing in relevance to the customer, value to the customer, then finances will follow, sales will follow. Then you move into the whole issue of stewardship and managing money and talent well. But those to me are the two critical components of a healthy business: is a healthy, growing, relevant brand. And then you manage the resources that brand, quite frankly, the brand attracts. And that's what's going on right now with Chick-fil-A. The brand is attracting a lot of income, and it's attracting an incredible army of talent. What was the third one? I'm just going blunt.
Yeah. So the biz, the culture, and the team. You're hitting on
The
all
team.
three of them.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the team, I alluded to that earlier. It's a cliche, but we don't achieve many great things on our own. I'm a member of the National Football Foundation board, and one of the reasons I am is I love college football, principally because of what you learn in teamwork. I mean, it is a team game. Yes, you have skill players. You have guys that can kind of take you to the next level when you got a great quarterback or tailback. But at the end of the day, you better have those big guys up front blocking and a fullback who can block, or those stars don't really get to maximize their talent. And so for me, I've already alluded to it. I wanted to attract people who could do what we needed done better than I can if I continued to do those kind of things myself. And even in the case of the cow campaign, which I talk about in the book, I didn't do the agency search. I delegated the agency search to David Sayers and Greg Ingram, and I told them, when you think you have found the right agency, you come get me, and let's go talk to them. But I'm trusting your judgment on picking the agency, because they were the guys who were going to work with them day in and day out, not me. And obviously they made the right selection.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. And when I walked into that shop, when I walked to the Richards Group, I felt a similar culture to Chick-fil-A. I felt a family commitment to great creative, not just making money. The benefits of being privately owned by Stan. And it obviously became a very, very good marriage for us. But that's just one simple example of letting other people that are part of your team make big choices, make big decisions.
Yeah.
And they're not going to always nail it, but more times than not, they will.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about your biggest mistake, because because I think it's so important for people to hear that. Like, so we made such a great decision over here, but not everything you do is going to be perfect. But I want to say one thing about Stan Richards' group. In the book, everybody, I don't know if you can see it, but in the book, he's got a picture of the Stan Richards agency having a stairwell meeting.
Yes.
And I just thought that was fantastic. So just the culture of everybody in the stairwell, we're having a meeting. I just think that's fantastic.
Well, he did that with all his clients, and the point was he wanted everybody in the agency to know who their clients were,
right?
Even if they were not directly working with that client. And I bet we had 2 or 3 stairway meetings a year with Stan and his team.
Yeah, and I love that. And I had my finger on the page. Hold on, I'm gonna find it, about the purpose. Because okay, here I got it right here. So when I read the book, you were talking about how the time frame when this was done, it was in tough economic times, right? Early 80s. Yes. And so, when time gets tough, people, they have to have a little faith. And so I love your purpose statement. It says to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that is entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. What a beautiful purpose statement.
Yep. Well, the background is that was written in 1982. Let me tell you what led up to it, because it was a crisis period. Price of money was over 18% interest rates. We're wailing the nation of teeth now when it's at 6 or 7%. It was over 18%. Mall development came to a screeching halt. Well, so what? Well, that's where we were building stores. All of our stores were in malls at the time. It just stopped. Retail sales crashed over 30%, including ours. So we got a serious cash flow problem all of a sudden. First time Chick-fil-A had ever had a sales decline. To make matters worse, Truett had signed his own personal assets to back up a loan to build the first office building. $10 million. Doesn't sound like a lot today, but in 1982, for a $100 million business, for a guy who has most of his assets wrapped up in a farm in South Atlanta, big deal.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, we had run a promotion under my supervision, pretty typical fast food commercial with, not promotion with coupons and in newspapers and direct mail. And it was within the first 12 months I'd joined the company. And it blew up the budget, went over budget by $2 million. Again,
That's the big mistake I was talking about.
that's a big mistake. And it was a huge mistake. So you got the price of money, you got declining sales, you got a corporate office building debt, and then here comes the new CMO piling on with a $2 million over budget. and Truett Cathy, who was the founder, came to our young executive committee and he said, "We got a serious cash flow problem, and I want to know what you guys are going to do about it." And of course, all of us kind of looked at each other, and the other guys were thinking, well, most of it was out of our control, except what Robinson did over there. So we went off site for 3 days to figure out how we were going to try to stay afloat, because it was iffy. And by the end of the first day, we'd probably done all the things you would think we'd do. We froze hiring, we froze building stores, we cut the budgets. We approved rolling out a new product called Chick-fil-A nuggets, which we had no idea they'd be so popular.
Yep, and adding soup to the menu, right?
Adding soup to the menu.
Mm-hmm.
And but by the end of the first day, it looked like, well, we might be able to manage this. And Dan Cathy, who was Truett's oldest son, was sitting there, and he said, "We got over half of the staff and half the operators who have been with us less than 2 years. I'm not sure all of them know how we're looking at this issue." And what he was getting at was not just the numbers, but how we think about the business and how we think about what do we think in the midst of this kind of a crisis.
Right.
And he said, "Dad, I'd really like for us to try to nail down a clear statement on why you get up in the morning. Why do you come to work? Why are we in business?" Now we all had a sense of what made Truett click, but it had never been put on paper. And suddenly we have not just a few dozens of staff members and operators. Now we have hundreds. And that's when we wrote that statement. In less than 2 days, we crafted that statement to glorify God with being a faithful steward, etc., what you wrote. And it really captured three big ideas. Glorify God. Truett saw the business as a gift. Right up there was his salvation, quite frankly. He said, "Listen, all that I am and all that I have is in his hands. So I hold this business with loose hands. But number two, I want to make sure we're being great stewards of what we do have in our hands. And number three, let's do it in a way that it's going to have a positive influence on anybody that comes in contact with Chick-fil-A, within the family or outside of the family." Three big ideas. And that corporate purpose has stood the test of time. Not one word has changed. It still sits out in front of that first corporate office building. And I will tell you, Nicole, that over time, what really fascinated me about that statement was how practical it was, because we were constantly running major initiatives and issues and decisions through that litmus test, that statement. We're about to spend X or do this or hire people to do that. Does it line up with this statement, or is there any aspect of it we're not sure about? And we tabled a lot of stuff, or we would wait. And it, quite frankly, made decision making easier. That's my real message for your audience. When you have clarity about why you exist, and as I said earlier, what your non-negotiables are, decision making becomes easier. And the other benefit of clarity around that is that you're empowering everyone else in the organization to make decisions on their own. And
right,
people
right through the litmus test.
Yeah. And people aren't going vertical with every big decision. They're in their own respective area, their own respective groups. They know what's important, and they know what to do. And so it's really only the biggies that represent some sort of astronomical shift in the business that ever reaches the executive committee. So that purpose has served the business incredibly well. I was with a group of Chick-fil-A staff just last week, about 400, just on a little session of talking about history. And I told them, if you have not studied Truett Cathy, if you've not read the history of the corporate purpose, if you haven't heard him talking about it on videotapes from past meetings, shame on you, because even though the man has graduated and gone to heaven, you still work for him because that corporate purpose hasn't changed. So therefore, you still work for Truett Cathy.
That's right.
And it's still a family business. Now it's a big one, but it's still a family business.
Yeah.
And so the value, I can't overstate the value of clarity around purpose and values.
Yeah, and the third point in here is to have a positive influence in all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. But one of my favorite, I'm a big fan of stories. I think they're such good teachers. So you have a beautiful story in here about a gal named Martha that wouldn't put a smile on her face.
Yes.
And I just think that is fantastic because I do tons of customer service training, and I tell leaders all the time, just get up from your desk, walk around, smile at people, make small talk.
Right.
It'll go the long way. Will you tell a little bit about?
I will. But first, I'm going to finish another point I want to make about that $2 million mistake.
Okay.
I walked into Jimmy Collins' office, who was the COO, about a week after that thing hit the market and exploded. And I apologized. I said, Jimmy, I was too aggressive. Quite frankly, I was probably arrogant. And as I think about it, we just did a promotion on steroids that looks like everybody else in the fast food business. And I'm sorry. And Jimmy said, well, don't worry about it. I spoke to Truett. I assured him that I'd been involved in the decision. He said, we just invested $2 million in your education. You're not going to make that mistake again. But the other upshot of that, Nicole, was it completely reshaped how we looked at marketing at Chick-fil-A. We decided we're not going to discount or we're not going to coupon at Chick-fil-A ever again. We're going to take most of the money in marketing instead of spending it at the national level where we're actually far from the customer and far from the operator. We're going to funnel that money and that marketing support through the operators at the restaurant level. And that is still the model of Chick-fil-A. Quite frankly, it's an inverted model to most of the industry. But I don't think it would happen if it hadn't been for that mistake.
Yeah.
Now the story about, yes.
Let me double tail on that a second time, because one of the things you said is, because we talked about what is your definition of leadership. And then you said you couldn't believe the amount of patience and grace these leaders had with you. Yeah. So two more great qualities of a wonderful leader, right?
Yeah, clearly Jimmy demonstrated patience and grace when he told me that. I asked him, should I go upstairs and apologize to Truett? And he said, I wouldn't go up there right now. He says, I've taken care of it. He understands that you were not alone in that decision. So grace covered me.
Right.
And quite frankly, being that early in my career, it taught me that I learned that they had not lost their confidence in me. And I found Chick-fil-A over time to be the most empowering environments you could ever imagine. The ability to innovate and think outside the box was unbelievable, as you can tell by a lot of the stuff we did.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now, the story about Martha is not one that I personally observed. It's one that Jimmy tells.
Okay.
And I think I give him credit in the book. They were at a grand opening early in the life of Chick-fil-A in one of their malls, and Jimmy and Truett are both there to help open the store, help train the new operator and his or her team members. And behind the counter, there's this young lady named Martha who she's just not smiling. I mean,
right.
She's doing her job, but she's not smiling. She's not really engaging with the customer. So Truett says to Jimmy, would you go over there and please ask Martha to smile at the customers? Jimmy does. I'll shorten the story. This exchange happens 2 or 3 times where nothing improves. Finally, Truett goes over to Martha and he says, now, you have got to really stop doing that. And she said, well, what are you talking about? You've got to quit smiling all the time. People wonder what what is going on with you? And she looked at me and she said, yeah, you got an incredible smile, and you smile and they don't remember why they walked up to the counter. I mean, he absolutely psyched her into a smile. And sure enough, she kept right on smiling. And Jimmy's point was, people are much more, when he tells that story, people are much more likely to follow through personal influence rather than position power. Jimmy was using position power to try to persuade her, and that isn't what Truett did. And he never forgot it. He told that story hundreds of times, and he allowed me to put it in the book. Yeah.
It's a fantastic little story. I love it. Yeah. And so I love in the book, you have a whole section where you talk about the principles of Chick-fil-A culture, and it starts with the purpose. Would you share a little bit more? I mean, I go places, I do, like I said, lots of customer service training and lead groups and leadership teams to think about their culture. That's what I do. And they're just flummoxed at, like, how does Chick-fil-A do it? So I've got the guy right here. Tell us how they do it.
Well, I'll tell you how they do it. One is clarity about what purpose and values are. We've already talked about that.
Yeah.
But the hard work is to attract talent, to attract people who can live those things out.
Yes.
And Truett often said, including when he was interviewing me, we don't train culture here, we hire it. Now, there's nothing embedded in that implies discrimination of any sort. What he's really saying is we do our homework. We want to make sure that we attract people to the business that look at life and treat people the way we do already. And his point was every hire we make, whether it's an operator, an independent operator, or a staff member, is either adding to the culture or hurting it. And one of the great things about the Chick-fil-A operator model, where operators are sharing in the profitability of the store 50-50 with Chick-fil-A, is because they have such a vested interest in the performance of the restaurant and the bottom line. What happens? They spend more time making sure they attract great talent to the restaurant. So if the home office is very, very diligent about which candidates they select to be an independent Chick-fil-A operator, which they were and still are, if they're very diligent about that and they have picked the right operator candidate, the trickle-down effect is the operators are going to attract great people as well. They're going to attract talent that think and behave like that operator does. And the operators, because they have a vested interest in the talent, not only attract better talent for the short term, they actually invest in them, they help develop them. And a lot of operators, almost half of the operators joining the Chick-fil-A family today grew up in a restaurant. In other words, they were first attracted by an operator. And these young people matured and proved their capability, fell in love with the business, but they wouldn't be in the business if Chick-fil-A hadn't first picked the right operator. And that's my point. So last year, I think they selected something like 130 operators out of over 10,000 candidates that applied. You better, when you have that many opportunities, hopefully you're making a lot of really good choices.
Yeah.
But those, and I was with a couple of great operators just this past week. One was 28 years in the system, and another one was 27 years. And Nicole, they've each given back to the business over 10 operators each.
That's amazing.
Okay. So that's a long answer to how do you develop culture is clarity, but how you develop it is attracting and keeping the kind of talent that will sustain it, that will build it and sustain it. And in the case of Chick-fil-A, it's not only staff members, but it's those independent contractors in the restaurants, because there are now something like 200,000 team members out there in those restaurants.
Crazy number.
Crazy number. And if you or anybody else out there has a consistently nice, pleasant experience going to a Chick-fil-A restaurant, it's because somewhere in the chain of events back at the home office, somebody made the proper judgment in offering that operator the chance to join Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. On page 29, you've got a little note in here. You said Truett's motivation was clear. I'm not interested in your money. I'm interested in your ability. After decades of observing great operators, I believe that Truett looked at two key traits: their ability to attract, develop, and keep great people, and their passion or their fire in their belly.
Yep.
As I like to label it, he looked for operators who were never content with the status quo and who are always looking to improve food, consistency, service, and sales.
That's correct.
I
Okay,
put
so
a big circle around that.
let me illustrate that. One of the guys I was with yesterday, I won't give his name or where he is, but one of the guys I was with, not yesterday, but Friday, I've known him since he was in a mall restaurant. His sales in that mall restaurant his first year were probably about $300,000. And I'm guessing his income was maybe 30 or 40,000. That operator today is running 2 restaurants and satellite locations around a college town. Last year, his only businesses did 30 million in sales. And his income is 7 figures.
That's epic. That's wonderful.
Epic. Now, I talk about in another place in the book, the part of the genius of the Chick-fil-A culture is this operator deal and the fact that it's never changed. Now, if Chick-fil-A suddenly went public, what do you think a public organization would do? They would never dream of letting a guy running some chicken restaurants make 7 figures.
No, we'll give that to the stockholders.
Give that to the stockholders.
Yeah.
Well, Truett's attitude was the operators were basically a half net partner in the business. They earn it, they get to keep it. The other side of it was the other half was his. And he was totally at ease and peace, and so was his family, with operators having an agreement that was open-ended, generous. I don't know any other way to describe it. It was ingenious, it attracted great talent, but it's generous. And as a result, you don't have anybody trying to copy it.
Right. And it magnifies God, right? That's a quality of God, generosity. So that's fantastic.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And so the other thing that is ingenious about Chick-fil-A, and this is on page 79, is your marketing model. And I just want to say this before I read this, is so I work with a lot of people who are very frustrated because they know how to attract customers to their building, but they don't have a budget. They don't have it. They're not empowered to spend $1. I was working with a gal who is in business development, and she says, I just want a banner. I just want a banner out front. That's all I want. And I can't get the money to get a banner.
Right.
So, just something silly like that might cost a couple $100 or something. So this poor gal, doesn't, she's on a corner where she could get a lot of drive-by traffic. So anyways, here's what you wrote in the book. I know you know what it says, but my leaders need to hear this. So years before Chick-fil-A became a national brand, we flipped the model for funding and executing marketing upside down. Even now, restaurant operators and market operator teams, not the home office, provide 80 to 85% of the tactical financial support for execution of brand marketing. We provide them with tools and training, but they finance the participation and the execution. And I'm like, what if we gave this gal a little budget? What would she do for her business?
Right. Well, the operators, both individually and as a group in their markets, are deciding how much money to spend on marketing their business, but they understand they have to do it within the creative box top that Chick-fil-A gives them, that we gave them. They can't run out and just create their own creative, but there's an assortment of resources that they can choose from on a digital marketing platform. And literally we call it Brand Builder. So yeah, I mean, these contractors, independent contractors, are not just capable of running a restaurant; they're capable of building it.
Right.
And they are motivated to build it. They're empowered to build it, and they're resourced to build it. And I alluded to it earlier, but that upside down model that I described, which would be like this,
Yep.
is the complete opposite of the model in other fast food businesses where all the money and the control is at the top. And that really came out of the $2 million mistake, where we said, you know what? We're not going to spend all this money out of Atlanta. We got these great leaders in the restaurants. We're going to empower them. Now, that meant we spent several years developing resources so they could do it the right way. And the home office still all about that. And the evolution of that, Nicole, was that spread beyond just marketing. It spread to developing the hospitality model. It spread to how do we develop digital interface platforms with customers. You go through a drive-through at Chick-fil-A, you don't talk in the squeaking box. You talk to a real person. Well, that system was actually developed in the marketing group. But it was all based upon give the operator what they need to build their business. We'll do for them what they cannot do for themselves. They can't create the cow campaign. They cannot innovate menu items on their own. They can't build kitchens on their own. They can't even build all the back of the house technology to make a hospitality model like that work. We'll do that. But we'll give them what they need to leverage their talent and the talent of all their people. So I go through a Chick-fil-A today. I saw them walking around with that handheld technology capability to take care of me, ask my name, take my order, take my payment. I'm through there in less than 2 minutes. I mean, I was around when it was developed, and I'm still amazed that they get the orders right. And they say my name. They can bring the order out to the car. Steve, here's your order. Anybody else doing that?
No.
And nobody's got to do it because, yes, there's incredible genius at the home office, but it only works because of the leadership in every restaurant.
Yeah. So I love that. And I've got a question for you. So my son lived here in North Carolina, went to Appalachian State. Day he graduated, he's like, Mama, you know how you say you're supposed to live your dream? Well, I want to move out west. So when I'm not working, I can go hunting and fishing. I said, okay, let's figure out how to get you out where you want to go. So he applied for a position out in Billings, Montana. And so we have missed him not being around the corner, but he's thriving, totally thriving out there. Well, he texted me because part of your book talks about how, people wait 2 days for the doors to open to the Chick-fil-A. So he texted me and he said, there's going to be a Chick-fil-A in Billings, Montana. I mean, like this was like groundbreaking, epic news. And so I get the updates, and apparently the line was around the building, messing up the traffic and everything the day that it opened. And the boy is so happy because he can get a spicy chicken deluxe.
Good for him. Good. I tell him I appreciate it because I have a pension program. Thank you.
Yeah, and he, but I'm curious. You're like, I was out there Christmas ago, and it was like 15 degrees below zero. So you guys are gonna have to figure out what kind of suits you're gonna put your people in.
Well, you go through those stores, almost all of them now have permanent structure canopies, and there's heaters mounted in those canopies.
Oh, that's fantastic.
They can work year round.
That's great. That's great. Well, I want to ask you a question about generations, because one of the things everywhere I go is people talk about, all these generations and these young people and this and that. And I'm not a big believer in separating people into generation, because I feel like, I agree with you, let's just hire the person that has the right philosophy, core values, belief systems. That's going to help a lot. And that can be across, all the different generations. But you do have a little section in here about Truett being part of the greatest generation. And so will you talk a little bit about that? Because there aren't many of those people in the workforce anymore, but they still are having an influence. And I'd like to hear your take on generations.
Well, he was in the same group as my own father.
Yeah.
And if the audience out there has not read Tom Brokaw's 2 books on the greatest generation, I highly recommend them. Truett came back from World War II, and with his brother, they borrowed think they borrowed something like $6,000. They accumulated some more of their own money, and they bought this little house in South Atlanta. They put in 6 booths and 10 stools, and that's where they started the Dwarf Grill.
Yeah.
It was a 24-hour grill. Now, the reason I'd start with that, because Truett didn't come back expecting anybody else to make sure he had roof over his head and food on the table. We unfortunately have, I fear, grown a generation with too many who feel that somehow the culture or the government owes them something. These people came back, I don't work, I don't eat. And that drove creativity. It drove investment. And so when you look at the post-war late 40s and the 50s, oh my goodness. I mean, you think about the things that came out of the ground in America in the 50s.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna start listing them, but just go back and look at the sudden boom of technology, manufacturing, innovation, productivity in agriculture. Well, that's because you had all these greatest generation young men and women coming back, and they had to provide for their families, and they had their own dreams of how they wanted to do it, and they innovated. For Truett, it was the restaurant business. And my dad, he and a brother started a hybrid seed corn business in South Alabama, but nobody else was going to take care of them. And so I think part of what we benefited from having Truett around for so long was someone who don't work, don't eat. Now, let me illustrate it beyond him. He had 3 children. He had 12 grandchildren. So second generation, 3, third generation, 12. I think fourth generation, there's something like 24, 25. Very early, he set up a policy with his kids and then his grandchildren. If you don't work at the home office and or you don't become a Chick-fil-A operator, you're not going to generate any money from Chick-fil-A. I'm not paying you to be just because your last name is Cathy. And in fact, he also had an additional rule. You cannot become either a staff member or a Chick-fil-A operator until you've worked at least after college, expected. You've got to work somewhere else at least 2 years. I don't care where you work, who you work for, what industry it is, but you got to work somewhere else at least 2 years. Because he wanted them to come back to Chick-fil-A with some sense of what the world is like outside the Chick-fil-A sphere. And that is, I tell you, that is still the family policy.
That's fantastic.
Into the fourth generation.
Yeah, and you say in your book, you say your dad and Truett had these 3 traits, and I guess that's what he's trying to do all the way to the grandchildren. You got to be hardworking, persevering, and incredibly loyal.
Yes, that's exactly right. He would go the extra mile in terms of giving you room to make mistakes, as long as he knew you were working hard and you were loyal. If he sensed someone was not loyal and was really not acting in the best interest of the business, he didn't have any problem dealing with that. He didn't have to do it very often, but he would. Yep.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that's so great about Chick-fil-A, that you had just a little, like, part of a bigger sentence, but I just love this. It said, we operate equal parts head and heart.
Yes.
So
yes.
Will you talk a little bit about head and heart,
well,
and
I think
how you might balance it?
Well, I think the evolution of that began with Truett. I mean, he was running a little diner. He didn't work in the kitchen. He worked at the counter. He would go out of his way to find great talent to work in the kitchen. And many of them stayed for decades in that diner. But he worked the counter because he wanted to get to know every customer. And he'd walk around the dining room and talk to them. My point is, yes, he was interested in growing transactions, but more importantly, he wanted to grow relationships. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so attracted to the whole idea of the operator model, where operators were vested in half half of the profit of every transaction, where operators would just not look at people as a transaction, but as customers they didn't want to lose, you know.
Right.
So one of the best ways to not lose a customer is actually get to know them and interact with them. Now, when you're doing the kind of volume you're doing now, it's hard for operators to interact with every customer, but they're still putting people out there with a face and a smile, interacting with every customer. Truett realized that if he was out actually interacting with customers, he would have a sense when somebody was not only having a great day, he'd have a sense of when somebody was having a bad day. And it wasn't unusual for him to do something totally off the cuff, comp their meal, give them a free pie, go visit somebody they found out in their family that's sick. He just had a natural bent towards getting to know people, and it may be little things, but in some way touch their life. Now, I think at the end of the day, he simply wanted to earn the right for somebody to ask him, why do you behave the way you behave?
Right. So he could give his testimony, am I right?
That's it. That's it. But he never soapboxed his testimony. Never. He earned the right to be heard, and he would only speak if you set him up, if you asked him.
Yeah.
So he's given every operator that same kind of platform, you know, earn the right to tell people why Chick-fil-A is different. So that to me there is a place for strong strategy and strong business discipline and stewardship, but there's also a place to deal with people with honor, dignity, and respect. Acknowledging them as part of God's creation that deserve those kinds of relational interactions.
Right. Yeah. So at one point you were talking about Truett, and I just, again, I pull little things out that resonate with me, and I'm sure they resonate with my audience. But you said we just said he had a balance of head and heart, intuition, which you just talked about, right?
Big intuition.
Yeah. Understood the analytics, and was an inspiration to everybody that he met, which is the third part of the purpose statement. So he was just like a living, breathing, somebody you could really, allow to lead by example.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and start listing all the major decisions that I would take to him and say, Truett, I think we ought to roll out grilled chicken or waffle fries or college football or use cows to promote the business. But virtually every one of those, number one, he would say, if you think it's right for the business, I trust your judgment. And number two, invariably, even the big ones like college football, never forget 3 years into the deal with the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl which is how we got started. We're standing on the field before the game. He's going to do the coin flip. Place is packed. I said, Truett, I want to thank you for, backing me and my team up to make this decision to get into college football. I think we're on to something. And he stood there for a moment. He kind of looked around. He said, well, I don't see anybody in here that can't be a Chick-fil-A customer. And that was his intuition coming out. I mean, he was serious. I mean,
right.
I don't see anybody in here who couldn't enjoy Chick-fil-A. And if they can afford, he's thinking if they can afford this game, they can afford a Chick-fil-A sandwich.
100%.
100%. He didn't need to see a bunch of analytics. Yeah, he was a treat to work with. It was very empowering. I can tell you, he never called me his office one time to ask me why I did something that he didn't agree with. Not once. Now, I'm sure there were some things like the $2 million mistake, but never did he ever do anything to kind of undermine his confidence in me. I knew he was still happy with what my team and I were doing.
Yeah, he was a Steve fan. Steve and his team.
He was.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, the last little nugget I'll just throw out here is you said when you have this balance between head and heart, comes two things come: wisdom and a sense of peace.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, he was not a big book reader, but I will tell you right up front, he was a big reader of the Bible, and he was a big fan of Proverbs.
Oh yeah, good stuff.
And Truett, he did have incredible, for a guy who never got beyond high school, he had incredible canny of making great decisions and encouraging us to not do something stupid, you know. And it wasn't just from experience. He just, I don't think he was just born with it. He did study other businesses, he studied other leaders. I don't think there's any question that a great source of his wisdom was from the Word of God and the Holy Spirit. And he was also fun, you know. And that gets to the issue of peace. He didn't lose sleep. He didn't worry about stuff. He told Jimmy and our executive committee one time, he says, there's only one thing I worry about, and that's positive cash flow. Nothing else I worry about. So in 1982, he was a little worried.
Yeah.
But as long as our CFO can tell him, hey, positive cash flow's fine, we're good with the bank, we're paying down the debt. In fact, we eventually got to the point where we had no debt.
Yeah, that's incredible.
He was a man at peace with himself and the world. He was in his world, and he absolutely loved having fun with people. Yeah.
Well, I have
he
had.
loved the cow campaign because it was funny. He was one of the biggest fans.
Yeah, yeah. And in the middle of the book, you've got a picture of where somebody stole one of the cows and off of the sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to get the book, everybody. You got to get the book, Covert Cows, right? And Chick-fil-A, How Faith, Cows, and Chicken Built an Iconic Brand. It's by my guest, Steve Robinson. He was the former chief marketing officer of Chick-fil-A. And, you know, my people are like, oh, no, she's closing it down. Don't do it, Nicole, don't do it. But I'll ask you one more question. So I bet you have one little nugget, a little something, a story that you want to share to kind of tie us off here. One more little nugget, chicken nugget, would you share with me?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I would, particularly in our current culture, and not just culture, but even business environment, I would encourage people to go in to look at their career as a platform of influence. If you're just looking at your career, okay, how many years can I put here, and I take a step to do this? It's a career to increase my cash flow or my position power. If you just look at your career as a ladder climbing exercise, I would urge you to step back and really think twice about that, because you need to think about what you're leaning your ladder up against. What are you basing that career on? And fortunately, I learned that the Chick-fil-A corporate purpose is not only meaningful to business, it was meaningful to me. I didn't go to Chick-fil-A thinking I'd be there 35 years. I'd already had 4 jobs by the time I interviewed with Chick-fil-A in 1980. But I stayed because it was an environment where I could lean my ladder up on a purpose and a culture and build not only a business and a brand, but build a platform of influence, build a platform of ministry for myself and my family. And so that's my nugget is what do you build? What do you want your career to be? What are you building your career for? Is it just all about you? Or is it actually design it so you can help impact and improve the lives of other people? And very often that means you got to hang around. You got to be loyal and stay someplace for a while. It's hard to have impact on other people and help other people grow if you're only there 3 or 4 years. And that, particularly in the marketing arena, that's far too often the case. There's just too much turnover. People ask me, why don't other organizations have corporate purposes like that? And why don't they last that long? Well, one of the reasons it's not just because Chick-fil-A is privately owned. One of the other reasons is you got too much turnover at the top. And so the next guy or the next gal who come in as a leader, either CEO or CMO, they want to rewrite everything. They want to put their fingerprint on it. Hang around and see what kind of personal influence you can really build. Because at the end of the day, when they put when the tombstone goes up there, there's a dash. There's the date born, the date you die. Well, the most important thing on the stone is the dash. What'd you do during the dash?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So Truett had a significant dash, and there's no question that there was a great deal of me that wanted to emulate him. No doubt about it.
That's a fantastic nugget. So just going back to what I underlined that Steve wrote in the book. So be hardworking, perseverance, right? And extreme loyalty. So that's just beautiful. All right. So everybody, I've had a fantastic guest on the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. And I know you enjoyed yourself. Will you please go down there and press that little like button? It just takes a hot second. Do that. And then if you'd leave a little comment for both Steve and I would really appreciate it. Steve can be found on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/S Robinson Consulting. Any other way that people can contact you if they want to reach out?
That's probably the place to go. But the book is still on the market. If they want to buy a book, it's still on Amazon. And there's contact information in the back of the book too.
Oh, fantastic. All right, let me give it to you one more time. Covert Cows and Chick-fil-A, How Faith, Cows, and Chicken Built an Iconic Brand by my guest, Steve Robinson. Steve, I'm so grateful for you to be on the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. It's been great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. It was fun. Appreciate it.